For 20 years I have built my life on the certainty that the dead cannot surprise you. Bone is a ledger. Every healed fracture, every pitted joint, every thin stress line across a rib tells a story that will not change simply because you look at it. That belief has carried me through courtrooms, mass grave recoveries, and late-night calls from sheriffs who didn't know what to do with what the soil gave back. I have been, for lack of a better term, unflappable. Most mornings begin the same way. I unlock the rear service door of the Harrow County morgue before the sun has burned off the valley fog. The concrete corridor swallows sound. My boots echo softly on worn pale green terrazzo. I brew a bitter cup of black coffee from the ancient machine in the staff lounge, then walk the line of refrigerated drawers one by one. Habit makes me run a gloved finger along the door seams, checking frost, listening to the low hum of compressors. I flip open my leather logbook, each page cross-hatched with pencil sketches of femoral heads and cranial sutures, each line a shorthand memory of a solved mystery. I whisper bone names under my breath. Pars inter articularis, os koshai, a ritual as calming as prayer. I teach younger techs when the budget allows, though here in Harrow County staff usually means one overworked coroner and Mara Vance, the assistant who does a little of everything. She jokes that I'm part monk, part mortician. In truth, my work is quiet because the science is clear. Measure, compare, date, and the dead will yield their facts. The morgue itself suits this mindset. A squat 1970s concrete box behind the hospital. Paint bubbled from years of humidity, fluorescent fixtures buzzing overhead like lazy hornets. Outside, farmland stretches into fog, and power lines hum against the wind. Cell reception falters more often than it works. Isolation keeps distractions away and lets the evidence speak. That afternoon, grey sky leaking drizzle onto the loading dock, the sheriff called. Some old farmhouse had collapsed during a property dispute excavation. Beneath its rotting floorboards lay human remains. "Thought you'd want a look, Doc," he said, voice crackling through static. I almost said no. We were short-staffed, and farmhouse burials rarely hold surprises. But professional pride, and the old itch to read an untold history, tugged me in. I told him to bring the bones to me tonight. I did not know then that this case would break every rule I lived by. The remains arrived after dark. I heard the van before. I saw it, tires hissing across the wet loading dock, headlights cutting thin white cones through the fog. Mara Vance rode shotgun, her hood up against the drizzle. She gave me a short wave as the sheriff and his deputy wrestled a plastic evidence crate from the cargo hold. The container was scuffed and streaked with mud, the kind of thing usually reserved for flood victims or deep woods recoveries. A cold draft followed it inside, dragging the smell of wet earth into the morgue's chemical chill. I helped slide the box onto the main autopsy table. The stainless surface pinged softly under the weight. Mara peeled back the top with a grunt. "Straight from the farmhouse cellar," she said, the lilt of small-town sarcasm in her voice. "Sheriff swears it's been there 100 years. Could be more. Voodoo time for you, Doc." The bones were caked with clay and rootlets, their color a deep tobacco brown. Some fragments were loose and splintered, others whole and smooth from decades underground. Even before cleaning, I could tell. Adult male, robust build, long femurs, heavy cranial ridges. My hands moved on autopilot, lifting each piece and laying it on the table in anatomical order. Skull, mandible, cervical vertebrae, ribs fanned like ivory shutters, pelvis wide and fractured along its iliac crest. I muttered each Latin name out of habit, a way to keep focus while I catalogued. For a moment, the work felt comfortingly routine. I explained to Mara, mostly to fill the silence, how we estimate sex by pelvic inlet shape, age by the closure of cranial sutures, ancestry by subtle angles of the nasal aperture. She smirked but listened. She's seen enough bodies to appreciate the craft. I said the remains looked mid-1800s by soil staining and tooth wear. Nothing extraordinary. Then the light above us flickered. It was a familiar Stutter. These fluorescent fixtures do that. When the ballasts overheat, but in that heartbeat of dimness I thought I saw a vertebra rotate, just a twitch, subtle as a coin tipping on a table. When the light steadied, the spine looked normal. I told myself it was vibration from the van door slamming shut outside. Bones are inert. Dry calcium phosphate cannot contract or pivot. Ligaments rot. Joints lock forever. This was simple physics. Still, I checked the table for slope. Flat. No air currents. No explanation. Mara leaned against a counter, scrolling her phone for signal. "Hope you're not getting spooked already, Doc," she teased, though she hadn't seen the movement. I cleaned a rib with a soft brush, noting cut marks, maybe tool damage, maybe animal gnawing. Then it happened again. The rib cage shifted, just enough to make a faint, dry creak, like wood adjusting in a quiet house. I froze. A gust of cold air swept across my hands, though every vent was still. "Did you feel that?" I asked. She glanced up. "Drafty dump of a building. Happens." But something in her eyes, the quick dart toward the bones, told me she wasn't as relaxed as her tone. I focused on procedure. Photograph, measure, note. Keep control through data. My pen scratched across the logbook even as the hair on my arms stood up. And then the room slipped. For less than a breath, the morgue dissolved into lantern glow. Earthen walls pressed close. A man, or something like one, groaned through gagged cloth. Boots shuffled on packed dirt around him. The smell of sweat and damp straw hit me hard enough to choke. I blinked and the stainless table returned. Fluorescent light buzzed steady overhead. Mara was still by the counter, unaware. My coffee-slowed heart thudded against my ribs. I told myself it was exhaustion, imagination fed by folklore and bad wiring. Yet the bones on the table seemed subtly reposed. The spine straighter, ribs more aligned, as if they had heard something I hadn't meant to say. I swallowed, tasted soil on the back of my tongue, and forced my pen to keep moving. There had to be a rational explanation. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't sure one existed. I did not go home that night. Routine would have told me to log the evidence, secure the remains, and return in the morning rested. But the moment the cellar vision faded and the room righted itself, something stubborn in me refused to surrender to fatigue or folklore. Bones are data. If they appear to move, then the phenomenon must be documented until it either proves itself an artifact or reveals a measurable cause. So I prepared the morgue for a controlled observation. First, lights. I rolled over the tall halogen exam lamp we keep for detailed photography and aimed it downward to supplement the erratic ceiling fluorescence. I set a light meter on the table edge, noting lux levels every few minutes. Light can create optical illusions. I wanted proof that what I saw was not a trick of contrast or flicker. Next, cameras. My phone on a tripod for wide frame. The morgue's battered Nikon set to continuous capture. I taped a small marker line on the table for reference so any shift would register against a fixed background. I started the voice recorder on my laptop, narrating every step, time, action, ambient temperature, as if presenting to a skeptical courtroom. Mara returned from the hallway with 2 cups of coffee. She raised an eyebrow at the setup but said nothing. Her usual dry humor was absent. She had seen just enough to know I was taking this seriously. "Protocol?" she asked finally. "Protocol," I confirmed, though the word tasted thin. "If something's moving, we quantify it." I explained quietly, half to her, half to the recorder, why this shouldn't be possible. Bone, once desiccated, is essentially stone, a matrix of calcium phosphate and collagen long devoid of living cells. Without muscles or ligaments, there is no mechanism for motion. Friction and mass keep fragments inert. Even under vibration, they only rattle, they do not align. It felt important to say this out loud, to remind the air that the laws of biology still applied. I switched the overhead fluorescents to their lowest setting. They always buzz before they fail, and I wanted to capture any flicker if it triggered change. The halogen beam painted the table in harsh gold, every fracture line standing out like fault maps. At 0:37 by my watch, the pelvis rotated. No ambiguity this time. The iliac wings, wide as a butterfly's spread, inched to square themselves with the spine. A dry click rode the movement, subtle but undeniable. "Did you—" Mara's voice caught. She stepped closer, coffee forgotten. "Yes," I said, forcing steadiness. "Marking movement, pelvis axial rotation, approximately 7 degrees. My voice sounded like someone else's. Calm, because calm was required. We watched. Nothing else moved. Temperature held at 60 degrees. The light meter showed a brief dip in lux as the ceiling flickered, then steadied. "Could be vibration from the fridge compressor," Mara said, "but softer than usual." "Too directional," I replied, and explained to the recorder, if vibration, pieces would scatter, not articulate. I kept measuring, femur length, sacral angle, documenting every millimeter. Numbers give shape to chaos. Then came the second event, a full series of vertebrae, lumbar into thoracic, ratcheted upward one by one with tiny ticks until the spine lay almost anatomically correct. The sight made my stomach tighten the way it does when a long-dead case suddenly shows human contour. Bones are meant to be puzzle pieces. They are not meant to solve themselves. Mara whispered, "Jesus." "Language," I muttered reflexively, as if scolding a student, though my own pulse thumped loud in my ears. A cold draft swept across the table, raising gooseflesh on my arms. The fluorescents above buzzed and dimmed for half a heartbeat, and the room fell away. I was back in the earthen cellar, but clearer now, as if the vision had gained fidelity. The lamplight was weak, smelling of whale oil. 2 men in rough coats heaved a body down rough stairs. I felt the grit of soil beneath my boots, though I hadn't moved. One man's face was obscured by shadow. The other turned enough for me to glimpse a mouth twisted not in malice, but weary necessity. They dropped the body, alive, barely, and began shoveling dirt. I gasped, and the morgue returned. My own hands were clamped on the table edge hard enough to ache. Mara's voice came thin. "You froze." I forced breath back into my lungs. Visual episode. Brief. My training pushed me to describe, not panic. Lantern light, historical setting, auditory component minimal. "You looked like you were there," she said. I didn't answer. I turned to the recorder, voice shaking, but intact. Subjective temporal displacement concurrent with bone articulation. No known biological mechanism. Possible hypnagogic hallucination due to fatigue, but vivid. I steadied my hands on a caliper. Procedure. Always procedure. I measured. The newly aligned spine, jotted notes, adjusted the camera angle. Mara tried for humor and failed. "Old stories say, bones remember." "Folklore fills gaps," I replied, though it came out hoarse. Signal on my phone remained non-existent. The building swallows service at night. I tried the landline. Dead buzz, probably storm-related. No consults tonight. I wanted to call a lab colleague, to have another rational mind hear this. Instead, I stared at the half-assembled skeleton and felt the first real crack in my certainty. History is supposed to be fixed, a ledger of events long sealed, yet the bones seem to insist the ledger could rewrite itself when observed. I added an analogy for the recorder, because sometimes I think in metaphors when facts fracture, like watching dry sticks knit into a puppet with invisible strings. Minutes crawled, we waited, nothing moved. The room stayed oppressively cold. Even our breaths fogged faintly. Mara hugged her jacket. Finally she muttered, "Doc, this is bad juju." "It's data," I said, though the word rang hollow. Another shiver of light, and with it, a third bleed. This time no full vision, only sound. A man screaming somewhere deep and old, cut short mid-cry. The vertebrae trembled, then settled. I found my voice. Observation 3. Auditory anomaly. Duration 2 seconds. Mara's eyes were wide. "We're not imagining this." "No," I said quietly. The rationalist in me wanted to break and run. But the scientist, the sworn expert who has testified under oath that bones tell the truth, forced me to stay. Truth, however ugly, must be catalogued. I drew a long breath, sipped cold coffee, and turned to reset the cameras for an extended night watch. Because whatever was happening on this table had just crossed the line from strange artifact to active. Impossibility, and impossibility, in my experience, demands evidence before it devours reason. I told myself that night's documentation would be enough, that a few hours of controlled observation would reveal a mundane cause, vibration, temperature shift, light strobe. Yet when dawn finally pried at the high slit windows, the bones had realigned almost fully. My instrument sat cold and mute, and I had no explanation fit for any lab report. I slept briefly in my office chair, chin to chest, until a text from the sheriff woke me. "Any ID yet?" I didn't reply. Fatigue clung to me like damp gauze, but curiosity was stronger. I returned to the autopsy room, halogen lamp still casting its harsh cone over the table. The skeleton waited in eerie semi-articulation, spine nearly perfect now, ribs closing in around the empty chest like shutters half drawn. I decided to go deeper. The first step was simple: measurement. I put on my surgical loupes and examined microfractures along the femora. Old bones should be crumbly. Their internal trabecular lattice collapsed after decades underground. These, though dry, had a strange tensile sheen at the break edges, almost as if the mineral had been subtly rehydrated. Under UV light, an old trick for detecting modern adhesives or consolidants, the surfaces glowed faintly at the joins, not bright enough to suggest resin, but enough to make me wonder if some biochemical process was at work. Yet there is no metabolism left in bone this old. Cells die. Canals collapse, collagen decays. Calcium phosphate is inert. I narrated each, finding into the recorder, forcing my voice to stay clinical. Facts first, fear second. Mara arrived late morning with fresh coffee and a skeptical squint. She listened as I outlined the previous night's events. The rotations, the lantern vision, the scream. She made a face somewhere between disbelief and reluctant awe. "Maybe you were dreaming on your feet," she said. "I've seen medics crash like that on a long night." "I don't dream with my eyes open," I answered. But even as I said it, doubt rippled. Fatigue hallucinations are real. Still, the camera. We checked the Nikon's memory card. Frame by frame, we saw it. Pelvis angled differently. Vertebrae advancing between timestamps. No hands, no vibration blur, just repositioning. Mara swore softly. "Okay, not just you." We exchanged a long look. For the first time, I sensed her mask of practical sarcasm slip. I increased the rigor. Audio recorders clicked on. I set temperature loggers at 3 points around the table. We killed the halogen and let the fluorescence run alone, then reversed. I even tried a simple provocation, whispering the bone's catalogue numbers aloud, as if coaxing a reaction. Nothing at first. Then, just after noon, The air shifted. A low pop of the ballast overhead, a stutter of shadow, and the skeleton twitched. Not a single piece this time, but a collective flinch, like a sleeper startled in bed. Ribs ratcheted closer with an audible dry crackle. Mara gasped and backed against the tile wall. "Doc, that's—" "I see it," I said, forcing breath slow, marking time, 12:14. And then the vision came hard. Not a flash now, an immersion. The morgue vanished into a clapboard farmhouse bedroom, sunlight broken by wooden shutters. A man lay gasping on blood-stained quilts while two others bound his wrists. I felt the heat, smelled sweat and iron. My own hands, gloved a second ago, were bare and slick. Someone shouted a name I didn't know. The room reeked of fear and linseed oil. I yanked myself backward with a guttural sound and slammed into the cold morgue wall. The vision tore away like paper. Mara was beside me in an instant, pale but steady. "You were gone," she said, eyes wide open but somewhere else. I forced air into my lungs. "Temporal bleed-through," I muttered, the term spilling out before I could stop it. "Impossible. Consciousness doesn't travel. Memory doesn't migrate." "English, Doc," I swallowed. "I think the bones are showing us, pulling us." She shook her head. "Bones can't do anything. Neither can dead wood. But this isn't staying dead." I checked the data loggers with trembling hands. Temperature dropped 3 degrees during the episode. Light levels dipped. The recorders caught faint audio. A man's choking sob, low and distorted. Impossible. No one spoke during my absence. I tried to anchor myself in analogy for the recorder, for my sanity. It's like reading an old book and finding mid-sentence that the book has started writing you into its margins. Mara stared at me. I felt cold, and I swear I heard a horse, like outside. We sat in silence for a long time, both listening to the steady hum of the fridges, the fragile normalcy of fluorescent buzz. I decided to research. If data can't explain the phenomenon, history might. We hauled out the county's dusty property ledgers, stored in a forgotten file closet off the hall. Their leather spines cracked, air thick with paper rot. Mara flipped pages while I scanned entries for the farmhouse lot. The name appeared, Elias Crampton, 1874. A notation beside it, missing farmhand dispute. No remains recovered. Newspaper clippings later mentioned a trial dismissed for lack of body. My skin prickled. We had his body now. We returned to the morgue as evening crept in. Outside, the fog rolled back across the farmland, swallowing cell towers and road lamps alike. The building felt smaller, hungrier. I tried one last scientific angle. Recording bone resonance with a handheld ultrasound probe. Normally useless on dry remains, but worth a try. The probe squealed with static the moment it touched the sternum, a keening note that set my teeth on edge. The lights flickered, and another vision slammed me. A barn this time, winter wind cutting through slats. The man, Crampton, struggled against ropes, a strike of something heavy against bone. I felt my own ribs give. Pain ripped through me bright and total. Then gone. Just tile floor, cold air, halogen glare. I was on my knees. Mara knelt too, gripping my shoulder. "Enough, this is wrong. We should leave." But I couldn't. My entire professional life was built on the axiom that the past is a fixed ledger waiting to be read. Now the ledger was alive and dragging me through its entries. If I fled, I'd leave it unwritten. Or worse, let it write itself unchecked. "No," I said hoarsely. "We document." Her eyes searched mine, and I saw fear there, not just of the phenomenon, but of what it was doing to me. We worked in grim silence after that. Cameras rolling, lights alternating, every creak noted. Each time the fluorescence stuttered, the bones shifted, clavicles locking, skull tilting toward anatomical posture. And each time, fragments of the past lunged closer, clearer, louder, crueler. By midnight, I knew two things. First, the skeleton was reconstructing itself deliberately, and with each step it pulled us deeper into its death. Second, every time I looked away from science to gather courage, something inside me whispered that history is not dead. It's waiting, watching, ready to claim its readers. I kept logging data because the alternative, surrendering to the whisper, felt like drowning. But even as my pen scratched across the page, I could feel the past leaning closer, eager to make me part of its unfinished record. By midnight, the morgue no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a mouth. The fluorescents had given up their steady glow, dimming and then flaring in slow, arrhythmic pulses that left long skeletal shadows sliding across the terrazzo floor. The air smelled of damp earth and formalin, coppery at the edges, and each breath felt stolen. My notes were a tangle of times and sketches, but the patterns, if they were patterns, had stopped making sense. The skeleton on the table was no longer a loose puzzle. It was nearly whole, vertebral column aligned, pelvis locked, ribs knitted. Only the skull and one hand remained apart, as though deciding if they'd join. Mara stood a few feet back, arms wrapped across her chest, the coffee she'd been nursing now cold and forgotten. "We shouldn't be here," she said finally, voice low but sharp. "Doc, this isn't science anymore." I wanted to argue, but the words stuck. She was right and wrong at once. This was still science in the sense that I was observing, measuring, logging. But the thing on the table was rewriting the rules those measurements depended on. And I couldn't look away. 20 years of building my identity on the certainty that bones are archives, not actors, held me rooted. "Once we understand it," I said quietly, "we can stop it from happening again." It sounded thin even to me. She gestured at the table. "Stop what exactly?" Before I could answer, the lights snapped off. Total blackness swallowed us. A mechanical hum rose from somewhere beneath the floor, the backup generator priming. My breath came fast, shallow. Then a faint orange glow bloomed along the ceiling as emergency strips lit, weak and predatory. They carved the room into long, angled shadows, and in that new light, the bones moved. Not subtle twitches now. A deliberate rise. Vertebrae stacking with a whispering scrape, scapula levering like slow wings. The skull rolled across stainless steel with a clack, stopped, then lifted without touch and seated itself atop the spine. Mandible gaped, then closed with a sound like teeth clinking in a glass. I whispered the first fact that came to mind just to stay tethered. Dry bone has no contractile tissue, no myofibrils, no cartilage, no ligamentous elasticity. My voice shook, but the recitation steadied me. "It cannot move," Mara's breath hitched. "Then look again." The skeleton was upright, not fully standing, pelvis anchored on the table's edge, but seated now, spine regal, empty eye sockets turned toward us. For a second I thought the room tilted because my balance failed. Then I realized the tilt was real. Cabinets, light fixtures. Even the stopwatch on the tray seemed to lean toward the figure, as if gravity itself respected its new axis. My first instinct was to measure. I grabbed the infrared thermometer, pointed. Surface read 68 degrees. Impossible. Room ambient was 60. Some heat was emanating from bone that should have been cold for over a century. Then the world fractured. It began with a shimmer, like heat above asphalt, and suddenly the morgue existed in triple exposure. Behind the seated skeleton, the same room in 1874, gas lamps hissing, wallpaper stained with smoke. Beyond that, an even older layer, rough-hewn cellar walls, lantern light trembling. My eyes saw them all at once, stacked slides. Each blink shuffled which was most solid. I smelled wet hay and coal smoke, heard a man groaning, another shouting, felt cold. November air bite the sweat on my neck. Mara's voice cut across, trembling. "Doc, the room's..." "Wrong, I know," I said. My voice felt borrowed. The skeleton's skull rotated toward me with an insect-slow grace. My stomach clenched. Then the next vision struck. Not a flash this time, but full embodiment. I was in the cellar, rope biting my wrists. Men argued above me in voices thick with dialect. A lantern swung, throwing stripes of light. My ribs ached where someone had kicked me. Fear was a taste, rust and bile. One man lifted a shovel. I tore myself free with a shout and slammed back into the morgue. My knees buckled. I caught the table rail. Sweat ran cold down my spine. Mara was white-faced. "You went somewhere again." "Past," I croaked. "I think his past. This is insane." "Yes," I said, and almost laughed. Brittle, joyless. But here we are. The skeleton began to lean forward, each vertebra creaking softly. I tried to rationalize aloud. Habit and lifeline. History doesn't move. Observers don't alter record. Time is unidirectional. Entropy ensures. The words cut off as clocks around the room stuttered. The wall clock, my stopwatch. Even the sweep second hand on my wristwatch jumped backward a half second, then forward, then back. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. A low, grinding groan came from the refrigeration wall like a ship's hull in ice. Mara stumbled closer to me. "We have to leave." "Adrian." I couldn't. Every cell of my training screamed to document, to witness. The idea that the past could be malleable, alive, was catastrophic to everything I've built. But turning away felt like betrayal of every case I'd ever solved. I raised my phone to film. The screen struggled to decide what it was showing, flickering between morgue and cellar, present and past. In one frame, I was standing where I stood now. In another, I knelt over a dying man in 1874, hands bloody. The skeleton raised its left arm. I felt my own left arm lift against my will, as if mirrored. Panic flared bright. "No," I hissed, but my muscles ignored me. The bone hand pointed toward the wall of drawers, toward the dark beyond. Mara grabbed me, shaking. "Adrian!" The vision swallowed us both. We were outside now. Moonless fields stretching forever. Men dragged a bound figure. Me? Him? Toward a pit. Cold soil stank of clay and rot. A voice whispered right beside my ear. "See it. Know it. Be it." The shovel rose, fell. Ribs broke. Mine, his, ours. Then the morgue crashed back, sharp as a defibrillator jolt. My chest hurt where phantom blows had landed. Mara sobbed once, harsh and unhidden. The skeleton completed itself. Clavicles slid into place. The last hand joined the wrist, and then it stood, actually stood, balanced impossibly on dry tarsals atop steel. Its skull turned to face me fully. Sockets like wells. For a second everything stilled. Even the emergency lights froze mid-flicker. The air was so dense it felt liquid. I whispered, almost prayer. "Bones do not walk." They did. It stepped once, just enough to prove the point, then halted. And in that stillness came the deepest horror, understanding. This was not a haunting, not a soul returning. It was record-keeping gone predatory. I had believed bones told fixed stories if you listened carefully. But stories can rewrite themselves when observed. History is not inert. It is waiting for witnesses to fold into its truth. I was no longer reader but ink. The skull dipped, almost courteous. Then, with a dry cascade like sandbags collapsing, the skeleton fell apart. Vertebrae clattering, ribs skittering, skull rolling to rest near my boot. Just old bone again, just evidence. Except the room did not return to normal. The orange light stayed strange and heavy. The soil and blood scent lingered. My watch still ticked out of sync. 2 beats forward, 1 back. And in the marrow of my own bones I felt something shift. The understanding that the past was not past. It was awake. Mara's hand found my sleeve. She was trembling. "We're done," she whispered. I couldn't answer. My pen lay where I'd dropped it, notes scattered like leaves. The urge to catalogue fought with a rising animal fear that nothing written could hold. I looked at the collapsed remains. They looked back, though eyeless. And in that locked stare came the quiet, terrible certainty. The skeleton had not just rebuilt itself. It had rebuilt me. As the emergency lights hummed and dawn hinted faintly at the slit windows, I knew I would have to write a report, and that the truth would never survive it. Some part of me would have to lie to stay sane, even as another part already belonged to the thing that had claimed the night. The emergency strips kept their low amber until the sky outside the slit windows turned from coal to wet paper. When the fluorescence finally snapped back, the room looked as if the night had never happened, except for the fine grit of soil in a ring around the table leg, the faint copper breath left in the air, and the way my wristwatch still hesitated before choosing a second. I began where protocol tells you to begin. Reset the space, stabilize yourself. Write. The first two were easy motions and impossible tasks. I returned the halogen to its corner, capped the UV lamp, coiled cables in deliberate loops. Each coil was a sentence I could still control. The bones lay in their old compliance, collapsed into quiet piles. I told myself the collapse proved ordinary gravity had won. I did not believe it. Mara stood at the sink with both hands braced on the steel edge. She had rinsed her face until it was blotched pink, the kind of wash you give yourself after a close call on a highway. "You're not going to write what we saw," she said, not as a question. "I am going to write a report," I answered, and opened my logbook. The pencil felt too light. I prefer ink for conclusions, graphite for drafts. The distinction steadied me. The official form lives in a drawer under the counter. I laid it beside the logbook and filled the header boxes with a neatness that felt like penance. Case HC 74CR. Description: partial skeleton, adult male. Condition: dry, long-term interment. Post-excavation mud and rootlet contamination. My handwriting held. Beneath preliminary interpretation, I paused. What happened in the night would not survive peer review, chain of custody, common sense. It would not survive the quiet brutality of a supervisor with a red pen, and if I insisted, it would not survive me. Forensic work is testimony. Testimony demands credibility. I have spent 20 years building it bone by bone. I am not a man who sees skeletons stand. So I wrote the truth I could keep. Anomalous shifts in bone alignment observed during low-light periods. Probable environmental vibration from refrigeration compressor. Recommends securing table to floor for future observation. I added a note about temperature dips. HVAC cycling suspected. I allowed myself one sentence of honesty that could be mistaken for metaphor. Subject appears to cohere toward anatomical order when left undisturbed. Even that felt like contraband. Mara dried her hands and came to look. She read the words once, a second time, then straightened. "I'm not signing," she said. "I won't be pulled into that kind of lie." "It's not a lie," I said. "It's what the report can hold." She shook her head. "I'm done, Doc." She peeled off her badge lanyard with careful fingers and set it on the counter as if it were evidence. I liked this work when it was quiet. I could stand the quiet. I can't stand the listening. She didn't look at the table when she said it. She didn't have to. We both heard something still listening back. She left without a slammed door. The sound I remember is the soft tack of her shoe soles crossing the terrazzo, closer to a heartbeat than footsteps. Alone, I cleaned the instruments. Soil flaked from the calipers. I caught it on a pad and bagged it because the habit is stronger than grief. In the bag's clear film, the grit looked like ordinary dirt. 1 hour earlier, it had been a century's voice. I photographed the final arrangement, if I can call collapse an arrangement, then reboxed the remains, piece by piece naming them aloud in the tone I use for students. Right clavicle, left ulnar, L2 through L5. Saying the names has always felt like respect. Today it felt like prayer, and I am not a praying man. By 8, the sheriff's van was back. He signed the chain of custody with a tired flourish and asked for a headline. Civil War era, he guessed. Hope imprecise and cinematic. Late 19th, I said. Better dates pending. There's a property lead. I handed him copies of the ledger entries with Elias Crampton, 1874 circled. He whistled low, the sound of a man picturing headlines and re-election. He did not ask me about the soil on my sleeves. He did not notice the way my wristwatch ticked with a syncopation no human heart could keep. When the van pulled away, the dock's steel door rattled shut and left me with the fluorescent buzz and the blank of the empty table. I closed my logbook. The pencil tip had shaken at cohere, leaving a faint ghost letter beside the real one. The twin lines looked like a stutter in my hand's memory. The night had left stutters everywhere. I went to my office, a small room with a window that frames nothing but the hospital's brick flank and a stripe of indifferent sky. The chair creaked like an old friend when I sat and opened a new document on the computer. This was not the form. This was the letter. I have written resignations for other people, drafts, advice, edits. I have never written my own. I did not start with "to whom it may concern." I started with the sentence that mattered. I cannot continue to testify to fixed histories when I have witnessed the past behave otherwise. I deleted it immediately. I wrote instead, effective immediately, I resign my consultancy and will not accept new cases. I listed reasons the administration could hold without embarrassment. Fatigue, family obligations, a desire to focus on research. I thanked the county for trust, the hospital for space. I signed my full name, the one that appears under oath on transcripts, and printed 2 copies. When I placed the letter on the coroner's desk, the building felt larger and emptier in the same breath. Work is a geometry you live inside. Remove one wall, and the air moves differently. My ribs ached as if a shovel had met them. I told myself the ache was from a long night on my feet. On my way out, I stopped at the autopsy room door and looked one last time at the steel. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. The lives I had read here over 2 decades seemed so clean now, so obedient. In truth, they had always been messy. We tidy the dead by telling their stories with tidy verbs. He fell. She drowned. They fought. The verbs from last night had no tense. I drove the county road slowly. Fog hung in suspended rags across fields. Power lines sang. A sound you can only hear when there's nothing else to hear. The steering wheel's leather was rough under my palms. When I glanced in the rear view, the morgue's squat concrete receded like a ship in bad weather. At home, I put the logbook on my kitchen table and did not open it. The clock over the sink ticked properly, a comfort, but I did not trust it. I made coffee that went cold untouched. I showered twice. I slept not at all. Days have their own anesthesia. I managed 3 of them. Disentangling accounts, answering polite emails, avoiding Mara's absence like a hole in a map before the first true after-image came. Not a vision this time, a reflection. I was slicing bread and glimpsed, in the knife's spine, my own hand laid over a hand made of bone. It was precise and brief. My skin, those dry phalanges, a single motion shared. When I looked directly, the knife showed only a tired man in a kitchen. I threw the loaf away. I have tried to explain to myself, because I owe myself the same plain language I demanded from others, why I resigned. Not because I am afraid of dead things that move, though I am. Not because of career damage, though there will be some. I resigned because my oath requires me to tell the truth about the past, and I now know a truth that breaks the oath's grammar. If the past moves when you look at it, nothing is certain. The witness is not separate. The ledger adds you as you read. I keep one indulgence that is not protocol. Each night I write a line in the back of the logbook where no one else will see. I saw him. He saw me. Beside it, I draw the faintest grid of ribs with a mechanical pencil that barely marks the paper. The drawing is wrong, too even, too gentle, and perhaps that is why I keep it. The dead prefer untidy lines. I avoid barns. I avoid cellars. I avoid the morgue road, even when a quicker route would take me past the hospital's back lot. When I pass an old fence post, I look away from knots in the wood. They are too much like sockets. Sometimes, in that hour when houses across the valley go dark and the power lines hum louder, I feel the tilt return. It is gentle as a breath, strong as a tide. Somewhere in a drawer, the bones are quiet. Somewhere else they are not. I tell myself that both statements can be true. I would like to end with an answer. Instead, I will end with the sentence that finally wrote itself in ink at the very bottom of my last official report, where no one will turn the page. Some remains do not rest. They rebuild, and when they do, they rebuild you.